No credible policies on climate change. That was the fail mark given to both major parties incredibly yesterday by the Australian Conservation Foundation with the release of its updated election scorecard. Both Labor and the Coalition are committed to cutting Australia's carbon emissions by 5% by 2020. That's the aim. But with Tony Abbott yesterday again promising no price on carbon while ever he's Prime Minister, and Labor putting off emissions trading for the entire term of the next government, should it be re-elected, both parties are currently tracking for big increases in carbon pollution by 2020, not cuts. To help us get a better sense of just what the next government, Labor or Coalition, will deliver in terms of climate change and carbon emissions, we're joined this morning by three guests. Jane Castle is Senior Campaigner for the Total Environment Centre. She joins you in our breakfast studio, as does John Connor, who's Chief Executive Officer of the Climate Institute. And joining you from Brisbane is Don Henry, Executive Director of the Australian Conservation Foundation. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Don Henry, let's go to you first there on the phone. What does the ACF scorecard tell us? What are the numbers?
Yeah, the final numbers, at this stage, Fran, unless we have further announcements, the Greens are on 89% out of 100, the ALP's on 44% out of 100, and the Coalition's on 20% out of 100. And Fran, as you said, that's a climate and the environment scoring. On climate alone, we've got the ALP on 31% and the Coalition on 18%. And our assessment is neither major party has a credible climate policy package going into the election.
And just very briefly, can you tell us why, on the carbon front, Labor outpoints the Coalition in your scorecard?
There's a couple of announcements by Labor in the renewable energy area that we judge to be stronger than the Coalition's. For example, Labor has put forward an announcement that would see $1 billion into the grid system to help connect renewables. That's one example. So there are some examples in renewables that are stronger than the Coalition's, but they're both failing, and I think that's dismal that we have both major parties in 2010 with a fail mark on climate.
John Connor from the Climate Institute, you've had a polluter meter in this election campaign, Polluter Meter 2020. I think unlike the ACS scorecard, you give the Coalition higher points in terms of carbon emissions than Labor in this campaign. Is that right?
Well, what we've got is two tools. One is our pollutometer, which shows the pollution reduction potential in Australia on the committed policies there, and the other is a star rating on their actual more in-depth analysis. And on the pollutometer, the Coalition with its emissions reduction fund is ahead, but it's still increasing pollution. It's nowhere near its target of 5%. And remembering both parties are committed to 5 to 25% in the world of action, and there is actually considerable global action. We can come back to that.
And when you say increasing pollution, both parties, can you quantify that?
Yes, and so we have the Coalition at increasing pollution by 2020 by 8% above 1990 levels, and the ALP, particularly even though they had a good carbon farming initiative on the weekend, but at the moment there's no guarantee that's going to stay in Australia. So we can't count that. So they're at 19% above 1990 levels by 2020 on that meter.
Well, it's not surprising, I think, that both major parties argue with that claim. Let's have a listen to Climate Change Minister Penny Wong when she was speaking to us on breakfast a week or so ago.
What we've said is we do need a cap on pollution to meet our targets. We've announced policies such as emission standards for power stations to ensure we don't continue to have dirty coal-fired power stations built in this country. We've announced very clear policies around mandatory emission standards for the fleet, and we have said we need to put a cap on pollution. Julia has said she will lead that debate, but we do need to bring people with us. So we are not doing what Mr Abbott is doing, which is saying, pretending that we can meet our policies. We know his policies will actually lead to emissions rising.
That was Climate Change Minister Penny Wong speaking a week or so ago on breakfast, and in that interview she also committed to Labor to meeting its 5% target. John, is Penny Wong right? Will emissions actually rise under Tony Abbott's watch? According to your, how do you say it?
Pollutometer.
Pollutometer. They definitely are going up.
Yes, we just don't think that they're going to be able to buy the abatement that they claim. And the point with the ALP is that they're just not making a clear commitment. Their process has a review in 2012, and so we can't right now in 2010 make that judgment.
So Penny Wong, for instance, would make the claim they'll meet their targets because they are committed ultimately to an ETS, but it's certainly not in the next term of government.
Well, it may be. It may come in 2012 in a rush.
Never.
It may come in 2012 in a rush, and we certainly hope so, but there's no clear commitment to that.
Okay. Jane Castle, Labor points to programs that it's announced in this election that says will deliver carbon reduction, tax breaks for cleaning up old commercial buildings, that what's been dubbed the cash for clunkers, which is rebates for trading in your dirty cars and getting cleaner ones, a new pollution standard for coal-fired power stations, which is, I guess, a grab bag of direct action, but could it work and deliver a credible target by 2020?
Well, it's bits and pieces. It's a kind of rats and mice approach, nibbling away at the edges of climate policy. And it's important to note that the tax breaks for buildings comes from the Renewable Energy Fund. So that's, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's bits and pieces. Nothing is the main game. And, the main game would have been energy efficiency in the absence of a price on carbon.
Just on that, the energy efficiency, because cast your mind back, Kevin Rudd was promising, I think as late as last year, or early this year even, but certainly last year, 3 key policies to tackle climate change: the 20% renewable energy target, which we now have, emissions trading, which we don't have, and who knows when we'll have it, if ever, and energy efficiency that you were just talking about, Jane. 2 of those have fallen over or been deferred. In terms of energy efficiency, why don't we have, is it disappointing we don't have a national standard? I thought there was a committee appointed to it. The minister confirmed that. They've got the paper, they've got the recommendations. Why didn't they do it?
Well, absolute lack of courage and also stunning short-sightedness. Energy efficiency could have been that second leg. And the problem is, you have a renewable energy target. Sure, that's 20% of renewable energy by 2020. But if demand keeps rising, it's just going to fill in with renewable energy, and we're going to keep polluting with the constant coal-fired power that we already have.
So energy efficiency, I'll bring you all in here, is really the mechanism by which all of us can feel like we're doing more. And if we're looking for a government lead on this, we have it maybe in the cash for clunkers slightly, we have it in the commercial building thing, but not more generally. And yet, John, 3 states do have energy efficiency standards, don't they? So what would it actually mean if we get this national standard eventually?
Well, look, I think, the Prime Minister's Energy Efficiency Task Group was asked to look at getting Australia to the forefront of our competitors.
You were part of that task force, weren't you?
I was part of that task group. And to get that, there's no way you can get there unless you actually put a greater obligation on all sectors, industry, commerce and residential, to cut energy waste and to increase energy productivity. There are schemes in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. We could streamline it. This could be sold as something as streamlining red tape. It's certainly a way of helping people manage bills. But what's eating away, what's the cancer here, is a paranoia about power prices and how they're seen in places like Western Sydney and Brisbane. And we've got the coalition running rampant scare campaigns, trying to light a match under that, and the government desperately keen not to put any kerosene there. So,
because does it mean higher electricity prices if we have national energy efficiency standards?
It actually doesn't. It's actually demonstrated in New South Wales and Victoria, you have up to $45 per household, and experience in the UK is that. But the ALP are not confident they can sell that message.
Okay, Don Henry, how did both parties rate in your scorecard?
Poorly, Fran, because they're missing on a major national scheme. There are some bits and pieces. The government is a little bit ahead of the coalition because of their commitment to help with energy efficiency in the commercial built environment sector. But we really don't have that national scheme that we need. And John's exactly right. I mean, blind Freddie knows that electricity prices are going to go up no matter what. They're not going to come down. Energy savings helps you manage the household bill and use less power, and it's also a very good way of driving productivity improvements in our economy because we're doing more with less.